and Bob Hanley have caved in parts of 7 decades, mostly in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, but in a lot of other places too, and have done a good bit of vertical. I used pressing knots in 1949 on a single rope and helped put on the climbing rappelling show at the 1951 NSS convention. This is where it all began, here at Schoolhouse Cave in beautiful Germany Valley in Pendleton County, West Virginia. We had the first underground mountaineering in the United States. Rock climbers from working Seneca Rocks about 5 or 6 miles on up the road decided they were going to try it underground in the dark. And so they worked with rappelling and prusicking and worked through the cave where other people had stopped at the jumping off place. Then the mountain climbers went on. Vertical caving was accomplished with cable ladders and block and tackle. This is the way it was done for 100 years before. This is the classic entrance to Schoolhouse Cave, and it is a classic cave system. Let's go back to the early 50s and watch a movie that was made of rock climbing or mountaineering in the cave. The old water trough was still there. A log ladder, probably the oldest vertical method. A body rappel, a painful way to descend very far. He had enough of that body rappel and got on the ladder right quick. The date near the bottom shows someone was there on August 16, 1941. A time-honored way to check the depth of a pit. We usually carry ropes differently these days. This part looks more like rock climbing. But these anchors don't look like ones for rock climbing. And now, the most difficult move in the cave. We've come to the Thunderbolt room. An old slide of a log ladder, again, probably the oldest vertical technique. A rope haul line, common for the 100 years before 1960 for vertical caves, using anything from man and woman power to VW Beetles. You can feel kind of nervous just sitting there being lowered. This book describes French cavers who in July 1934 were using devices called monkeys, which seem to be like modern cam ascenders. They were also using body rappels. One of the group, Ferdinand Petzel, now has a big business making caving equipment for the world. Prussik's rings, or knots, used once in emergency to get out of a cave. But for many years, cavers mostly used winches and cable ladders. Here I am on one in 1950. In 1951, we got the NSS convention moved out of Washington, D.C. We had vertical caving demonstrations outside, like climbing cable ladders, climbing ropes with Prussik's, and body rappel. Here I am again, this time on a blistering body rappel. Jim Gossett describes old times.
In the late 40s and early 50s, the deep pits that we had then were not comparable to the deep pits of today. A deep pit back in those days was 100, 120, 150 feet. A real typical example, in one of the first caves that vertical techniques were practiced in and polished, was in Hellhole in West Virginia. Back in those days, you had basically two choices of getting out of a pit. You had the block and tackle method, which was the prevalent one, where the caver was strapped into a parachute harness, put on a free-running block, and lowered gently to the bottom of the cave with a crew of from 12 to 18 people out on the mountainside lowering the rope. You came out by the same technique. Two of the big problems in those days were the rope and tackle twisting by spinning, and you'd get the tackle hung up. To prevent this, a technique was developed whereas the first one down would take a free line and run it out diagonally in the cave and attach it, called the guide line in those days, and subsequent descenders would grab a hold of the guide line and follow it down. This would prevent the tackle twisting. Another problem was time that it took. It took a considerable time to get in and out of the parachute harness, particularly after it was hauled to the surface of the cave without a caver in it. It was considerably twisted and tangled, and it took a long time to get the harness untangled and adjusted for the next climber. It was for this reason that I started work on a simpler type of harness. The first techniques that were used was just a loop with you brought it up around your waist and between your legs in 3 points with a carabiner. This was relatively simple and fairly comfortable and certainly a safe method. But being a rope, if you were sitting in it a long time, it tended to cramp you. So I decided, well, why don't I replace this with webs? So I did. I played around with a bunch of webbed harnesses. I finally came up with one that, whereas you could make the whole thing with a single piece of webbing and just stitching it at the appropriate places. And I prided myself that you could cut the harness in any one place, completely cut it into, and you were still safe.
Some more old photographs, a high-step rope ladder, and a pulley system, a lowering cage, another haul line, and the hauled. We've just come from Schoolhouse Cave, about a quarter of a mile on down the road. We're here at Hellhole now. Hellhole was a classic pit back in the 50s. It's now closed by the Germany Valley Limestone Quarry. But this is a good place to bring Bill Cuddington into the story. Bill started back in the early 50s, not too long after I started caving. But let's let Bill tell his own story.
Well, I'm Bill Cuddington. I started caving in about 1950, but really didn't get into high-powered caving until 1952, and that's when I got in the NSS. And I got interested in vertical caving right away because the people I was caving with liked vertical caving, and they had the first cable ladders, which we'll talk about later on, made in the USA. And then our grottos ended up splitting up. And so I was kind of forced to go caving alone or with maybe one other person, so that's how I got into single rope techniques. And I heard about rappelling and heard about Prusik knots because Bob Hanley and Charles Fort had used Prusik some before I even did. And I'd read about them trying them. So I found an old mountaineering book in the library and found out how to tie a Prusik knot by reading that. And my first experience with knots, first practice, was on the side of my house at night when my parents were asleep. And that worked out okay. I did that several times. Of course, one time I was mistaken for a burglar by a next door neighbor, and luckily he took a second look before he called the police. Let's get back to the rappelling part and talk a little bit more about how we did those long drops at first. And they were body rappels, and at first, I did them without pads, and then I got a hold of my mother's pocketbook and used it as a leg pad. But a body rappel essentially is like this. You rig into the standing line. I'm left-handed now, mind you. Rope over the shoulder like this. Keep the braking hand as my left hand since I'm left-handed. Okay, I have the hand in that position so you could clamp in like that and hold yourself in with one hand.
If you're right-handed, this would be just the opposite way to rappel. But I soon found out I needed some kind of padding other than that pocketbook. So my wife, Miriam, is going to bring me some pads to use. Okay, this was the leg pad. And this was a shoulder pod. It was named the Pod after the movie The Body Snatchers. I know most of you probably saw that movie. We got the idea of this shoulder pad finally had to be made into a pod, because of just a flat shoulder pad, the rope wouldn't stay on it. So you take it and put it in this pod. And that way you protect yourself. And this was used on manila ropes. Now keep in mind, on nylon ropes of the day, you'd get out of control with this setup. 5/8" manila rope, like on a 200-foot drop, just as fast as you wanted it to run if the rope was clean. Okay, and also you could use this pod for carabiner over the shoulder rappel, which we'll talk about later on. Well, that's an awful fast, dangerous rappel. I always felt more comfortable doing a body rappel.
And we're going to emphasize safety to do with these vertical techniques. That's always been a problem, and you can't be too safe some of the time. Had some deaths in caving, not many in America, but we don't want to duplicate these deaths, and that's why we try to study these problems and come up with a solution and be as safe as we can.
What we're going to show you is a double brake bar rappel system, which when it first started, a lot of rock climbers were using just a single bar, and they'd run a rope behind their back, or they'd use a double rope or whatever. The bad thing about this is, see, you're using the carabiner the wrong way. You're pushing the gate, you're trying to bend the gate sideways out of the biner. That's why this rig was so dangerous, and we had some broken backs and broken bones from people using this, getting out of control and stuff such as that. Basically though, brake bars tend to get you out of control, and a lot of people got hurt. And of course, if that one single bar would rip out, you were in trouble. So the double brake bar system came along, where you just rig them in tandem. In fact, I've known some people to try 3 of them, and they would have to feed the rope, but at least they didn't go crashing down to their deaths. But basically, you'd rig it in like this, and you always have the locking biner in your seat, and you would rig it in. But even this was not satisfactory, because a lot of times even two of these on a brand new rope could still be too fast, or you'd have to lift the rope. It was usually never just right. So this led to the development of the rappel rack, which we're going to show to you. Okay, now here's the rack we were talking about that is really similar to the double brake bar system. And John Cole is the inventor of the rack. And he figured out well, at first we thought we'd only need 5 bars on here. It turned out we needed 6 for better control. Another thing, the biggest thing that came after the double brake bar rigs for rappelling for cavers, now this is not for rock climbers, was the spool. And the first wooden spool appeared in the mid-50s. And I have the understanding that it was a fellow named Dean Abbott that got the idea up of the first wooden spool. He was on a ship, a merchant marine or in the Navy or whatever, and he got the idea for a spool from the capstans on the ship. Okay, so the first one was wood, and they had a lot of horror stories I could tell you about the wooden spool. I tried it once, just a long time after it was invented. I tried it, and it didn't run smooth enough for me, and the rope would tend to catch the spool on fire. I never did really like it. I kept using body rappels or carabiner over the shoulder. 3 or 4 of us come up with a metal spool. Don Black came up with an aluminum one. I came up with this idea for a steel one. Tommy Watson I did. And at first, this one here is used in the climbing contest. But if you can imagine, it used to have a corkscrew on top instead of this other drum. Okay? And I'm going to hook it on the rope to show you how it would work. But bear in mind that that's the way it was set up. And I did an awful lot of drops. The first time I did Surprise Pit, I used this spool. Now mind you, I would have a locking carabiner here too. I'm not using a locking carabiner, but if I was actually going to rappel with it, I would. So I'm going to rig it into both the drums so you can see. And I would be wearing gloves. Okay, now, okay, we're down in the cave and we've got to get back out again, and we're going to show you a series of ascending systems that were developed to get back up a rope. Of course, as I said before, the earliest system used was Prusik knots. And the way you tie a Prusik knot is you have a loop of rope, like so, loop it, pull it through itself once. You've got 2 rings, but you need more than that to grip the rope, so you come through again. And Dick Mitchell was a friend of mine. In fact, I took him to his first cave. He thought this system up mainly for racing, and then later on Keith Wilson got the idea of using it long distance and came up with the first ascender box. This is not a Wilson box here. This is a Simmons roller box here. But at first it was only thought up for speed.
John Cole to tell you about how he developed his rappel rack.
In 1962, I moved to Huntsville, Alabama to work for NASA as a part of the welcoming package from the Chamber of Commerce. They included a map of the area that included a feature on there known as Natural Well on Monte Sano. I was interested in checking out a lot of the features that were in the Huntsville area, and so very quickly one Saturday I went to Natural Well to take a look at it and was just astounded at this vertical entrance that about 30 feet wide and just went into blackness, as best I could tell, forever. Throwing rocks in there, they seemed to fall forever. I knew it was a phenomena, and I was determined that I was going to find a way to get to the bottom of that. I concocted some wild ideas as to how to get down to the bottom of that, but fortunately, before I tried any of them, I happened to run into some members of the National Speleological Society, the Huntsville Grotto, and they persuaded me that people had been down there safely using mountaineering techniques known as Prusiking and rappelling, and that was the proper way to do it. So I got in touch with the Huntsville Grotto and met Bill Cuddington and John Patton and a number of other cavers in the area, Bill Garrison and Chris Croak. Bill Cuddington at that point in time was anticipating enormous descents of 1,000 feet. He was even talking about someday rappelling a mile. That was he already knew of limestone beds in Mexico and in other places, New Guinea and in France, that were at least 3,000 to 5,000 feet, and that it was quite clear that extremely long descents were going to be necessary. The difficulty was that that the weight of the rope and the stiffness of the rope could demand that you have a variable friction rappel device. One of the concepts we came up with for doing that was a hook. With this hook, we could it was possible to add another wrap to the rope. The rope was wound around the hook in such a manner as this, and actually you may want to be like that. We you'd clip into the bottom of the hook, and if you as you got to a point where you needed more friction, of course this part was tight, but since this part was loose, you could lift the rope up over your head and take another wrap around the shank. That did create some problems in simulating this, in that one did have to raise the entire weight of the rope up over your head, and there were several of us that were planning on that had several schemes going for building some type of rappel device for accommodating this this venture. John Patton was one of those. Dick Mitchell, the inventor of the Mitchell system, the climbing system later on, was also involved with a lot of schemes for building rappel devices. And I came up with a lot of harebrained schemes also. Most of our ideas were not manufacturable. Not with the techniques not with the tools that we had. But finally, one idea that I had seemed to be to just extend the double brake bar system into one long carabiner, effectively one long carabiner with an open end, so that we could pass the rope from side to side. And that in effect was the rack.
Sender got started back in 1967 as a result of a frightening experience to me in Schoolhouse Cave, West Virginia. While exiting the cave, the rope got caught in a crack in the overhang, and I was not able to step up high enough to pull the rope out of the crack and negotiate the overhang. My 3 Prusiks, I had slid them up as high as I could, but still I couldn't get my weight up high enough to pull the rope out of that crack. Fortunately, I was able to back down to the steep mud slope at the nick of time, get my weight off the rope, and have someone else who had already gone out come back down, re-rig the rope out of the crack, and then we all exited the cave without any further problem. But while waiting for the rope to be re-rigged and looking down at over my left side at the north well, and on the right side the portal going down into the big room, I thought, boy, if I ever get out of here, I'm going to design a system that would let me step up high to get over the overhang. So when I exited the cave, I was grateful to be out and started looking for a method that could let me step up high at the overhang. Therefore, the motivation for developing the Gibbs Ascender was not for speed or for efficiency of climbing, but it was for negotiating difficult overhangs. Shortly after this scare in Schoolhouse Cave, I met a young caver from the DC Grotto who was using a sailboat type of rope clamp or clamp and for his caving. I didn't actually see him use it, but I got the idea that it could be used down on the foot for stepping up high to get over to negotiate an overhang. So I went back to Cleveland. I built a pair of these ascenders, and this is actually one of the very first ones. It was very simple, with just the sharp teeth and a very short stroke cam with just a cotter pin on the back side of the bolt. It was narrow. We were using 7/16 gold line at that time and hadn't gone to 1/2 inch diameter ropes. Peter and I went to the NSS convention at Lovell, Wyoming. I entered the rope climbing contest for 100 feet that Bill Cuddington runs every year, and the record at that time was 86 seconds, as I remember, and with the rope walker method I was able to climb it in 43.5 seconds, reducing the record time almost in half. This generated a lot of interest, and Peter sold the 30 pair of cams he brought with him right out of our tent at the convention.
This is Sarah Corey, just a few years ago from a family movie.
Okay. Bonjour. On est au Québec. On parle français, mais we're going to say a few words in English. So it's going to be broken English, but with a French accent, so you see that it's French technique that we're trying to explain to you. First of all, a cuissard. I think it's a harness in English. Any harness can do, but it has to be very tight. Model Marilus has a combinaison for wet caves. It's raining now, that's why we use it in the open air.
A caver named Bruno Dressler in 1963 invented the ascender, the small petzl ascender, and the double spool descender. Those two improvements brought us to where we are today. The origin of the French technique came from two older techniques. The first one is the two jumar technique, using two jumar, each with a foot loop, going to a chest sling, just like the original prosthetic system. The inchworm is another technique basically used in the United States, using two jumar, one at the seat sling and the other at the feet, using only the feet to push. The frog system, or dead system, was invented by André Meosi, and it was a mix of both. It is shown on this video. It is used since then with little improvement.